our panel in just a second. And then we're going to take a break after they finish their presentation. They gave you some note cards. And if you could be thinking during the presentation of the questions that you might want to pose to the panel, please place those on the cards. We'll gather those in the break, and then I'm going to moderate and pose the questions to the panel so that we can distribute the questions amongst them, make sure everybody gets an opportunity to talk and answer the questions that you might have in mind. So, and so we'll handle that right after the break. So let me introduce the panel. I'm going to introduce them in the order they're going to be speaking with you. It's really an honor to be here with all of you. We love and adore Bill and Fran. Bill serves on the board of directors for Life and Trinity Ministry, so we have a very special connection with both he and Fran. And we're very honored to be here. So, Suzanne Stabile, who is sitting in the center here, will be your first speaker. She and her husband Joe co-founded Life and Trinity Ministry almost 26 years ago now. And I've had the privilege to work with them for the last 3.5 years. Joe is also a Methodist pastor at Cochran Chapel Open Road, and our ministry center, the Life Center, is on the Cochran Chapel campus. So if you've not visited us, we'd love to have you any of the things that we do there. Suzanne is an Enneagram master, and she and I travel all over the country and occasionally Europe, where she teaches the Enneagram and other spiritual related topics. She's a gifted speaker, so it'll be a lot of fun to hear her talk tonight. She's going to explain to you how we came to be involved with veterans and why we're passionate about helping veterans and their families. Then next, we're going to hear from Mary Ellen Irving, or Dr. Pate. She's a neuropsychologist, has an extensive background over 30 years in brain injury rehabilitation. You heard about my rehab background. I knew her long before we met around this work. She is one of the pioneers in brain injury rehabilitation, actually, in the country. So we're very honored to have her and hear her perspective on brain injury and what many veterans are facing when they return from their combat service. And she and her husband own Pate Rehabilitation. And actually, you'll notice on your brochure that we have established a fund, the Bill and Fran now having Justice for Veterans and Families Fund, and Pate Rehabilitation and Mary Ellen and her husband and have graciously offered some financial support towards that. If you're interested in learning more about that fund, we have a lot of information on this. And then finally, certainly not last week, we have Joseph Giacobbe. Joseph is a veteran. He will share with you some of his experiences. He's worked with us in our programming. Very honored to have him here. I had him write down for me his service. Joseph served in the military from 2002 to 2006. He was in Iraq and Afghanistan in the 101st Airborne. He's originally from Florida, and he's here with us in Texas now. We're really excited and honored to have him with us. So with that, if you want to come on up here, we'll turn it over to them, and then we'll see you at the break to get your questions.
Joe and I learned a long time ago, if we just say yes to God, and He just drops people in our world and can do all the things that we don't have the gifts to do. So it's my honor to be with these folks, and it's always our honor to have Lucy with us and doing all that she does and giving all that she brings down. Maybe 2 years ago, I was at First Baptist Church in Austin doing a fairly normal and routine workshop for me. I teach there 2 times a year and sometimes 3, and there's a community of people who have gathered there. You know, I'm going to be there 2 or 3 times a year to do work with spiritual disciplines and do work with the Enneagram. And I saw a young couple come in. They both had on green shirts, and they both looked very fit. And at the first break, she came up, and I don't know, maybe there were 100 people there. And at the first break, she came up and stood right before me. She was probably 6 feet tall. She started crying and said, "Will you help us?" And those are the magic words for me. That's kind of that's the way you get me. And I said, "Well, sweetheart, yeah, I don't know what you need, but I'll help if I can." And she said, "Well, you see that guy over there?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, we came together. We used to be engaged, but now we really can barely talk to one another. You see, we're both 60-year-olds and 30-year-old bodies. We've each served 3 tours of duty in Iraq, and we can't really communicate well with each other or anybody else. And we've been to VA, we've been to And this is the third time I've come to a workshop that you've done, and I know you can help us. And I said, wow, it's time for me to teach you to talk again in the next break. So I started to think about how I was going to respond to her, and she came back to me at the next break, and I said, you know, I'm from the Vietnam era. I graduated high school in 1969, and lots of my friends were in Vietnam, and there's a lot of loss associated with that war for me. So I pretty much decided that what I was going to do was work for civil rights and put all my energy there and kind of stay away from things that had to do with war. So I don't watch war movies, and I haven't read books about war, and I haven't done much to deal with issues having to do with war, and so I'm probably not the best person to help you. And she started crying again. And she said, yes, you are. You are the person to help us. And I need you to say this. So I said, well, I'll tell you what, my calendar is usually full, and I think this was in February, and I said, by this time of year, I'm usually full for the year, but you can go ask Lucy, and if I have a weekend open, I'll do what I can. So she and Lucy talked, and just as I was about to start teaching again, she came over to me and she said, you have one weekend open, and it's September 11th. I think you should help us. So I said, okay. So I came home and put together a think tank and started reading and watching documentaries and trying to learn everything that I could. And I gathered people around me who were veterans and therapists and clergy, and they told me what to read, and told me what to look at, and told me how to begin to think about all of this. And on September 10th, we went to Austin, and we spent the weekend with veterans from every war since the Korean War. And the first part of that weekend, I just asked them to talk to me, and they taught me a lot. On Saturday, I taught all day, and I don't know if any of you know anything about the Enneagram, but by the time I got back there, I had a theory that I could use the Enneagram to be helpful to veterans in a way that I didn't think any other spiritual tool would be helpful. So it was sort of experimental, but it turned out that it worked real well. And the thing that it addresses, without me going into the Enneagram, which I don't have time to do, but the thing that it addresses is the reality that once our men and women participate in preparation for war and in war, it causes a personality change that kind of changes the perspective they have on all of their relationships and the perspective that they have on who they are and who they used to be and who they become. And the greatest question that seems to be a struggle for veterans when they come home is their families say, and spouses and those closest. I just want you to do the way you used to. Can't we just do things the way we used to do? Can't we just go back to the way things were? Well, the veterans were very quick to explain to me that they had no idea what people were asking for from them. They no longer knew how things were or how they were. And they had no way of re-entry on a level that wasn't representative of all that had changed and all that had gone on. So my theory about the Enneagram, I was able to walk them through 8 hours that ended up being practical and helpful, and the piece that helped them start to build relationships back with people and to rebuild the relationships they had with themselves. Then on Sunday, we spent 6 hours together in a very large hall, and they told me lots of stories. I'm going to tell you 1 or 2. One of the stories is I said to the young man who was there, who was complaining about the vests that we have for our soldiers to wear because they instantly burn to the bodies of the people who are wearing them, and they can't get them off. And they had new vests, so these guys are talking among one another, and a guy from the Marines said to a guy from the Army, do you guys have new vests? And they said, no, probably never get them. And the Marine said, well, they're way too heavy, so even if you do get them, it's not going to help as much as you think. And then I heard about a conversation where they talked about the because they explained to me they really need to know that, because when they're standing in a Humvee, if it gets hit or if they run over an IED, it's most likely that they're going to lose one foot. And so they want to be sure that they have the foot forward that is not their favorite foot, and that way that's the foot that they lose. Now we're talking about 18 and 19-year-olds having conversations about how they're going to do without a body work. And I said at one point, you are going to have to start telling your stories, because we don't know which one. And we're out here looking in, we don't know anything about what you've experienced and about you. And they, around the room, said to me, we're not going to tell our stories. We don't want to live with our stories. We certainly don't want you to. So Roger Painter, who is the pastor of First Baptist Church in downtown Austin, was sitting way across the room. And he stood up and he said, well, I'm telling you, you're going to have to tell your stories. And here's why. If you don't, then it's going to be almost impossible for me to stand in the pulpit and say what I need to say to people who have come to hear the gospel message. So there's one more to tell you. There's plenty to be said. I'm happy to answer questions, but I want to end with the reality that after that afternoon, Lucy and I talked about it all the way home from Austin. We got home. Again, pulled together people who could teach us. We spent a year making sure that I had around me people who could do all the parts that I'm not equipped to do. I have one little part to play in all this, and I think my part is significant, but it's just one little part. And I told Lucy I would never again walk in a room with veterans alone, that I would have to have with me qualified therapists, clergy with no agenda. That's hard to find. We would immediately need people with us who do body work, because lots of times when we're working with veterans, there are things that are triggered for them that cause them to freeze, and it helps to have people around who do tapping, who can help undo things like that. So we put together a team, and we started trying to raise funds to do the work that we know is supposed to do. And we had a workshop, and Joseph came, and everything kind of clicked with him from my perspective, and the things that he shared clicked with me. And so we're making it part of our traveling team. If you have any questions about any of that, I have a few more comments to make later, I would be happy to. But now I think it would be a good time for you to hear what Miriam has to say.
Okay. How I got here. In 2007, I was invited to be in a workshop in the city. And it was with Department of Defense, Department of Veterans Affairs, Defense and Veterans Brain Injury Center. And the purpose of that was to have a weekend to build what kind of therapy should be done for veterans. And basically, it came down to the reality, which is that the traumatic brain injuries are the most significant ones there, because they are difficult of all kinds of things I'm going to tell you about and what happens to them. But it was really amazing that day, or one of the days, in a small group, and one of the military professionals was talking about how the different kinds of rules and standards, etc., were so difficult that when she tried to deal with people just coming out of the war, and she started crying. And she talked about how incredibly difficult it would be to even have any idea about how service, it's disservice of our soldiers having become more and more worthwhile. I'll tell you a few things. The Veterans Administration are responsible to all vets and take that responsibility very seriously. The problem is that there's not enough ability to diagnose and treat in any timely way. And so you probably, or you may hear from Joseph, the issue about how they come back, they make different kinds of wanting this or that, and they never get it. And I'd like to read you another thing that, hold on just a second. I wanted to include other things that you can cry about. One of them is, this is a department of the Army, Office of the Surgeon General. The date is 7 September 2010. There are two significant assessments for brain injury. And this is what the head of Neuropsychology Assessment Branch sends out. The selection of NN, which is the name of one of the tests, was nepotistic, and the long delay in examining alternative instruments is baffling. Efforts must immediately begin to compare other computerized, which that is, no doctor, etc., but the computerized neuropsychological tests in a fair and unbiased manner, and the best instrument selected. The Army is independently seeking to compare and to impact. Barring replacement of the atom, serious effort needs to be devoted to repairing known defects in the test, which may be beyond the licensed vendor's internal abilities. If one had to select a test today, the consensus of the Army's neuropsychological community is clear that the impact is a superior test, and the Special Forces Command made a proper decision in using it rather than the one they got. That was September the 7th, 2010. Guess what the tests are today? I'm sure you got it. Another thing that's been really interesting, that DOD has had a manual that tells you what you need to do rehabilitation of the soldiers and the veterans. And that in particular, there is rehabilitation of cognitive deficits, things about memory, reasoning, those kinds of things. In general, in the civilian world, 60 to 80% of disability keeping people from working is not because of physical things like paralysis, etc., but cognitive deficits in order to be able to function in the world. And we'll talk about it a little bit more in a minute. So you have the manual, and it says you have to treat cognitive disabled people, and guess what? Now there is a rule that says you can't do that because there's really no proof that it does any good to do it, so we won't be doing that anymore. That cuts out a lot of money that they would have to do if they did it adequately. So let's talk about some statistics. We're not sure how many have been deployed, but somewhere around 2010, there have been about over 200,000 alone, and there were over 2 million overall. And through 2010, 1.1 million combat deployed service members have transitioned from active duty to veteran status, and half of them sought care within the Veterans Health Administration. From 2001 to 2005, nearly 80% of the casualties were from IEDs. Do you know what IEDs are? We'll be talking about them more, but it's improvised explosive devices. Which brings us to the fact that we have 11 to 23% of deployed have mild traumatic brain injuries from IEDs. The moderate to severe brain injury patients pretty much get rehabilitation because it's so obvious they can't say there's nothing wrong with them. So, what is really a mild, traumatic brain injury? Any period or observed or self-reported the following. There's a transient confusion. Somebody just gets confused after the IED or the blast. Or they're disoriented. Or they're impaired with consciousness, comes and goes. Dysfunction of memory immediately before or after, can't remember what they've done, can't remember things before, what's going on. And then also headaches, dizziness, etc., that makes it sound neurological. So what? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about civilian traumatic brain injuries because they're different from the ones that are blast injuries. Injuries, the most common injury in civilian here is mild TBIs with acceleration and deceleration, and that is causing the mild traumatic brain injuries. So just the shift, they're shearing the tissues, and it's damaging the front part of the brain. And the major cognitive issues about that are about the prefrontal lobes and what they do. And what do the frontal lobes do? Well, the frontal lobes do things like this. They do all the planning and organizing in your brain, makes decisions, judgment. Judgment's a big deal. Inhibiting, insight, and in particular, insight is a huge issue because if you can't self-evaluate who you are, what you are, and what you can do, then basically you are almost likely to have problems, lose your jobs, lose your family, etc. Because without being able to evaluate yourself and you had a brain injury, then basically, I'll tell you a story about it. One civilian who was very bright, 40-ish, 45-ish, and he had been the #1 salesperson for 2 years with dressing, women dresses, very high, expensive dresses, and very successful. He was in an acceleration, deceleration action in terms of traffic injury, and he could walk, he could talk, he had a mild traumatic brain injury. He was married with 2 kids, very responsible, car accident, and after about 6 months, I got a call from his company and said, you know, we have this person who's been working with us for all this time, and he's really one of our best sales. This has been the best for 2 years. And he's had this accident, etc. And I mean, he's not doing anything. He's not successful. I mean, he's not getting anything done as they want him to do. So he came to see me. We did a neuropsych evaluation. He had 140 IQ. He could walk well, talk well. They tested out memory that's fine. But the little tests that have to do with reasoning and that kind of thing, he didn't do very well. His wife came and talked about how he was really doing some inappropriate things around their teenage kids, and she was really upset about that. We helped him to do some things about forcing his organization, etc., but he never believed what anything was happening, and he never used them. And what happened there was that he lost his job, he lost his wife, and he lost his kids. Now let's talk about the military mild brain injuries. When a blast occurs, and I'm really going to have to read this because I don't understand it very well, I think it's the engineers, etc. A blast occurs when there is an explosion of liquid or solid matter converting to gas in a near instantaneous fashion. Did you get that? Okay. That's called the overpressive way. And then, after that, a corresponding but weaker negative pressure wave rapidly follows, lasting 3 times as long as the overpressure wave. Each of these waves may result in clinically significant injuries in the brain and other body parts and systems. Now, what happens there is the things that are most vulnerable are their ears and eyes and lungs and their GIs. But they also have mild traumatic brain injuries. And it's different, this kind of blast from the civilian mild TBIs. What we find that is different in the brain dysfunction is that, yes, they also have the frontal damage, but there are other parts further back in the brain that are similar to the same kinds of occurrences that turn out to be moderate to severe brain injury. So basically, it's more than the mild TBIs in the United States. So what we have is situations with we have thousands of patients coming back into the United States. 13 to 23% of them have mild TBIs. They're in a situation where just from the economy, it's difficult to get new jobs. If you get one and you have the mild TBI, You have the probability of, same as what I just described in my case study. They might get the job, but if they don't understand what their own brain injury is, that's a huge problem, but also inhibition issues. You know, we have some people that live with us at Pate Rehabilitation. One man for 25 years who had severe brain injury, but his frontal lobes, amazingly, were not so involved. He had all kinds of physical problems, etc., but he could live alone, except that he had a little bit of problems in terms of inhibition, and every once in a while he would go be in a grocery store or something, and he would decide to grope somebody. He did it so many times that he was sent to a long-term living with us. And so what we're saying here now is this. We have all these people coming in. They may be having all of the problems that we're talking about. And so what does that have to do with my being here? Well, I'll tell a story, and I may be getting a little bit late, but I really thought when I heard that it really looks like this. Another thing that happened recently at the end of last year was that the state rehabilitation service had, there's a period, a part of them that is only for brain injury, traumatic brain injury, not strokes, etc., just brain injury. And that part of it is the funding is from DWI tickets. And it turns out that at the end of last year, somehow someone discovered in the state that all of the funding from the DWI for 2 years before had been put in other accounts, not for the DARS or TBI. So all of a sudden they found it somewhere. And then they decided that, well, they would give it to the TBI altogether, and it was $3 million. So, right at the time that happened, I thought, oh wow, I had heard something about veterans and the Enneagram, which I really didn't think very much of. I'd heard about it before and about that. But about that same time, I thought, oh my goodness, you know what would be great? Since the Veterans Administration is having so much difficulty getting these veterans coming in, we could get them through the state. Called in the superintendent of the state program there, and he said, oh yes, that would be wonderful. The problem is, it only took about 24 hours before we found out that the Veterans Administration really wasn't very happy that we were doing that, because you're not allowed to do that, because all of these veterans have to be treated by the Veterans Administration, except for some special categories. So, that's how I got to talking to them about the Enneagram, because I thought, you know, we know a whole lot about helping the patients, but if we can't help them some other way, it sounded like it would be a really good way to do the Enneagrams. And I'm just going to have one more thing to say, and it goes something like this. It's a personal one. If you think I thought Enneagram was no, I did it, and I read it and I thought, oh my goodness, I didn't do it with her. There are other ways to do it. And so I thought, that's right. he did it. And so he read it, and he kept on saying, well, yeah, this is me, this is me, this is me. And then he said, after a while, you know, it says that people at this number really are bossy. And I'm not bossy. And so that was kind of in the middle of, you know, we're having conversations about maybe helping with some funding. And when he was telling me all these things about, oh yeah, this is me, this is me, I thought, well, we agreed to give him that money, and so did it. And then after that, when he said, well, I'm not bossy, I thought, I want my money back.
That's not the way you were supposed to tell it. I agree with her. I'm a boss guy.
For any of you who know me, you know that a microphone never passes me that I don't speak into. Just a minute.
So I'll get right there, my friend.
I just want you to know if you have PTSD, you are not able to fill out the forms you have to fill out to get that disability declared by the Veterans Hospital. I want you to know that 90% of the women in the military have been sexually abused, as have many men. I want you to know that the Department of Defense and the VA hospital system are two separate systems. So when you're discharged by the Department of Defense, you have to apply for help at the Veterans Hospital. So you don't just slide over and have access to that. I want you to know that lots of folks that we run into have done 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tours of duty. And I want you to know the things that I'm going to do.
Well, I'm just kind of here in a small capacity. These are the actual superstars right here.
Hold the mic, hold the
Okay, can you hear me now? Okay, these are the superstars. I do suffer from PTSD. I have had 3 IEDs, so I have TPS, definitely. I got and found this woman one day. I don't know, and she affected me. I don't know how to explain it, but she taught me my number. We went through the Enneagram, and I was baffled. It really put me back, and it's an amazing tool, and it's helped me more than the VA has with my issues, without a doubt. And thank you. Thank you. But anyways, I just would like to say, absolutely amazing woman. Thank you. I gotta be done real quick. Sorry.
One thing we might talk about for just a second is the fact that, you know, there are a lot of religious organizations that are very supportive of our efforts in the war. They're very pro-American, as am I, even though I'm not too excited about the war. And I think one of the things that the veterans run into is they don't quite know where to go when they get home for help. Because it turns out that many religious organizations that are gung-ho about soldiers and parades and the war and our involvement in the war are not so gung-ho about equipping themselves to deal with the reality of the lives of veterans when they come home. So part of what we have to do is be sure that we educate those who know veterans to understand that the fact that a church is not pro-war doesn't mean it's not pro-soldier. And that we are actually all very open to being helpful and supportive in the ways that we can when veterans come home. I have found in our trying to begin this veterans don't really trust anybody, and I don't think they should. So I don't really encourage a lot of trust on their part until they experience that for themselves. And so we're very clear in my Trinity ministries that the only way we're going to be able to build this program is by word of mouth. We've got a lot of advertising, a lot of posters, and we're doing a lot of things. But ultimately, what's going to work for us is word of mouth. And so the thing that we need from every group that we speak to is we need you to take these koozies and these brochures and invite veterans and their families to come to the programs that we offer. One of the things that we've been able to do, because Lucy is a genius, is we have a program where veterans can come spend a Friday and Saturday with me, and then we have a monthly support group, and we have an experience called the Gathering, which happens in rural settings once a year for veterans. What I do with veterans on Saturdays and Sunday afternoons, I do with their families on Tuesday and Wednesday night following that Saturday and Sunday. We do an advanced Enneagram workshop for veterans later in the year, and we do all of that for $1,000 per veteran. And we are able to secure enough funding so far that we do all of that at no cost to the veterans themselves. And that will always be our stance. But you know, if you're a nonprofit and you start a program that is never going to pay for itself, I mean, ultimately, Lucy has a way for it to pay for itself, but you'll have to get her to tell you how much that. She does magic that I can't do, but what we have to know is that we're always going to rely on gifts and donations from people in order for us to continue to be able to work with veterans at no cost to the veterans and their families. And I also, before the break, want to say, from the absolute depth of my heart, I'm sorry. The veterans that I met are some of the most unbelievably kind, creative, smart human beings that I've ever run across. And I believe it is a disgrace the way we don't respond. And I don't want to get preachy because it's not my nature. I'd rather sweet talk you into stuff than guilt you into stuff. But we're going to have to do better. They deserve better, and I think we're all complicit in so many ways. And if we're not also helpful, then we're going to be complicit in an ongoing problem. I was at an event, I don't know, maybe a year ago, and a guy from Vietnam was talking about the fact that he was trying to school everybody on the draft. And a young veteran from Iraq and Afghanistan stood up and said, "Well, you know, we're part of the draft too." And he said, "No, you're not." He said, "Oh yeah, we really are. There's an economic draft. And we're caught in it." So we are trying to build a really comprehensive program that involves ongoing help. We don't want to be a flash in the pan. We're working with some organizations that handles jobs. Recruit military. We are networking with lots and lots of people. And of course, at the end of tonight or at any other time, we would gladly accept financial donations for what we're doing. Our number one ask from you is that you send veterans and their families to the program that we're doing, because that's how we'll spread the word about what we're doing.
Okay,
But before we do that, will you come talk about Judge Carr?
oh, sure.
Over in Fort Worth, there's a court, Judge Rick Carr, runs the Veterans Court in Fort Worth. I don't know if you're familiar with that. He's a veteran himself. He's a wonderful individual. And in Fort Worth, if you're a veteran and you get into trouble with the law for a nonviolent offense, you can be referred to this court. And if you complete the program within that court, then your record is expunged. And it's a wonderful system that they have available. There is one here in Dallas. I'm just now meeting people to learn about that. But we've been in this court twice now. We've been invited to come and present to the folks who are involved in this court so that they and their families can avail themselves of our program. And so that's a really exciting thing. So that's a that's going on in terms of the way of trying to help veterans who might be struggling upon their return. And I'll find out more about the Dallas program next week, and the judge who's over that court. But I think that's something very positive that's being put in place.
Okay, likes that.
Here, okay, great. And I'm going to meet with the support administrator, and so hopefully they can go there and talk as well. So I'm very excited about that because they've got a lot of wonderful individuals in that work really working hard to get better and to get jobs and get back to life. So, Joseph, did you have anything else you want to say? Okay.
Sorry about that, folks. She gets me emotional a little bit. Well, I had plenty of things to say, but kind of got choked up there. I'm currently in a disabled and homeless veterans program that is assisting, obviously, older veterans. But now I've been there 6 months. I'm seeing young vets my age and younger, that you can see on their faces they need help. They do need help. And the tool this woman has is help. It is without a doubt help. And it's been helping me. I don't know what else to say about that. That's the truth. Thank you.
There are 64 designated beds at the Fort Worth Night Shelter, Presbyterian Shelter for veterans. And they currently have 60 veterans living there. And I'm going to be with them next Monday night, no, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. Might just stay over for Friday. Okay.
Yeah, okay. I know that, so if you have questions or things you want me to read out to the panel, please just take a few minutes and jot those down, and I'll get those from you, and then I'll read through real quickly, and then we'll get the various speakers to address your questions. So let's just take like a couple minutes. It works. If we could get back in our seats, please, I'd appreciate it.
I don't know if they'll do the microphones or not.
Where's your water? Okay. All right, well, we'll go ahead. I've got one more person up here on the panel. This is Dr. Giacobbe. She is also a neuropsychologist and works at Pate Rehabilitation. And a lot of these questions actually, I'm glad she's here because they're targeted to her. And so she'll be able to answer quite a few of them. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this mic to the panel, and I'm actually going to stand back here so that I can read questions in the microphone so you guys can all hear them. And I'll pose them to the various people that I think can handle them, okay? Oh, here she is. She's back. Okay. All right, so a lot of these questions are actually going to be for Kier and for Suzanne. So I'm going to start, and I'm just going to kind of bounce the questions back and forth between the two of you, okay? So we're going to start with Dr. Hello. Okay, all right, so the first question is for Dr. Bison, and it's, will or can you help us evaluate what we hear in newscasts regarding Bobby Bale's actions in massacre and how military describes his IED and lived experiences? For example, one report from the defense lawyer says he does not remember the killings. And I showed this question to Dr. Bison, and she said, wow, I could talk on this for 30 minutes, and I told her she could have 3. So,
I've read a lot of reports about this incident in the media, and there are a lot of mixed stories about it. But what we know about IED injuries and PTSD is that he most likely had some damage to his frontal lobes. He was under stress. He didn't want to be deployed. Throw some alcohol on top of that, and there's going to be some disinhibition. If he was asleep and having a flashback, that just contributed to him going and doing those kinds of things. So it's a very complex story. We don't know all the details of that, but certainly, in my opinion, it was probably most likely a combination of his brain injury, post-traumatic stress disorder, and the stress on top of all of that contributed to everything. And he most likely doesn't remember it. I can't say that for certain because I'm not evaluating him. However, it is a very tragic case that shows that he most likely did not get the help that he needed.
I was just reading an article that just came through the last month about PTSD and TBIs, mild TBIs, and basically there are kind of signatures of some of the functional MRIs for PTSDs, and there's another signature for mild TBIs, but when they have both of those things, they get all of those places in their brain, and it's much more significant than if it's just one of them.
Right. Okay, I'm going to, sorry.
If you want to know more about the brain stuff with that, we have a sign-in sheet up here. If you want to give your email address, and we will be happy to give you some more information.
Right. Okay, Suzanne, I got a bunch of cards here that are about the Enneagram, so I'm going to let you start with this one. And it says, how is the Enneagram different from Myers-Briggs? And would you explain how the Enneagram benefits veterans? So, you might talk about the stress security a little bit.
Okay, wow, we've been trying for 18 years to come up with an elevator speech about the Enneagram, and the only way we can figure that is if we get stuck on an elevator for about 2 hours and we got it. But I'll do what I can. For those of you who don't know anything about the Enneagram is probably 4,000 years old. It is a spiritual tool that has to do with helping you recognize yourself in one of 9 categories, and from that spot you understand that the very best part of you is also the very worst part of you. And so the goal, since you understand the Enneagram number all your life, is for you to be able to be healthy in the number that you are, because you can't change to a number that seems nicer or more fun or something. In Enneagram wisdom, it is possible when you are extraordinarily stressed to access energy from another number, and you kind of intuitively do that. And when you're extraordinarily secure, you access energy from a different number, and you in many ways intuitively do that. But once you learn the Enneagram, you can learn to access the healthiest part of that stress space. Enneagram numbers are not determined by behavior, they're determined by motivation for behavior. And so you can't assign numbers to people because we all have the same behaviors, but we do them for different reasons. In terms of Joseph and me, we might respond exactly the same way to something, and he would respond that way because he wants to do the right thing. And I would respond that way in my number because I want people to love and love me. Same behavior for very different reasons. But what we found with veterans is that they all identify as the number that they go to in stress, not as their format. But that's an enormous disconnect, because the number that you go to in stress doesn't line up well with your motivation. And so they continually find themselves in behavior that they don't really understand, because it's not consistent with what's motivated them all of their lives to do or not do. So once I explain that to them, they literally kind of light up and say, wow, that's it. And it turns out to be a very helpful piece. One piece that I teach after that is that I really don't believe that you can take care of yourself, any of us, without the energy from the number that you go to in stress. And that's how veterans manage to take the best care of themselves they could. But you also can't experience any kind of holistic healing without the number that you go to in security. So it's important for them to have an opportunity to learn the whole system. So in learning the whole system, they can that once I point them out to them are very familiar. And then, once their families have the same workshop that they've had, then what they end up with is a new way to talk to one another that's depersonalized by the reality that you use numbers instead of names. So, my husband Joe is a 9, and 9 see both sides of everything. But I can say to him, Joe, you make me crazy when you take up people's side and you tell me there is one side. But that's a whole different statement from, as a 9, the fact that you see both sides to everything makes me, as a 2, feel kind of insecure as to whether or not you're going to really finally come down right. So it is really hard for me to talk about, but that would be I'm sure. Now, in terms of Myers-Briggs, I would say this. I'm an ENFJ. I have no idea what that means. I've done those letters since I was 19. If you've done Myers-Briggs, you probably know yours too. I have nothing against the Myers-Briggs. I think it's very helpful as far as it goes. And all I can say to you is that the Enneagram is much wiser, much deeper, and much more helpful because it helps you become more likely to recognize yourself in your essence rather than in your personality, so it helps you get back to who God created you to be after you spend a lifetime trying to be who the world demands that you be. At the break, somebody asked me if I would speak to this subject right now, somebody asked me to talk a little bit about the emotional experiences with the word, I only know what's been shared with me heart to heart. But I will tell you this. There's a man named Edward Tick who's been working with veterans for probably 35 or 40 years. But he only works on the East Coast, and so he's not available here for us. He wrote a book called War in the Soul. I highly recommend it. And in that book, he tells a story early on where he's visiting with a veteran who's coming to therapy, and the veteran sits down and he says, "So tell me, how is your soul?" And the veteran looks at him and says, "Are you kidding? My soul left my body a long time ago. There is no way that my soul could stay present to the things that were required of me as a soul." I don't know that I can say that more powerfully than that.
Okay, Dr. Wesson. Can you describe the current DoD initiatives that are planned to outsource additional resources for mental therapy to veterans?
I don't know that exists. There was something that came across the news today that was kind of sort of talking about that, but as far as I don't know if there's any plans to outsource that. In terms of what we do, there are times where the VA will contract individually for specific, very unique, special cases, but that's not very often.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let you answer one more then. What percentage of soldiers have experienced IEDs?
I don't have the specific numbers on IEDs, but as Dr. Hayden had said before, 23% have experienced mild traumatic brain injury, and that number is very likely an underestimate because a lot of the returning veterans do not report that they have concussion. They come back in, they want to go home. And the other number that I have is that, as you had pointed out before, the DoD and the VA are two separate systems. So when they come back, they go to the DoD and they have to register with the VA. And so out of approximately 23 million veterans in the United States, only 8 million are registered with the VA.
Okay. Suzanne, here's one. I think you can speak to this, or I can help. It says that is Texas and New Mexico, are those the only locations in which you hold seminars? Do you have training programs to add more people, or plans to add more people to help facilitate seminars? And where can someone interested in helping get training? You want me to answer that one? Okay. We decided to focus our efforts in Texas and New Mexico because that's where we have people and resources, and our hope was to get a really good solid base going. And once we felt that we had that, then we could look at how we might expand outside of this region where our folks are. We have 9 apprentices who've been training with Suzanne for 3 years now, who are preparing to help deliver the programming as well. And then we have partners in the cities that you see in your brochures in Houston and in New Mexico who have also been working with us to train to do that. With respect to the Enneagram, that is something that takes a long time to learn, and you have to be in an apprentice program for an extended period of time. Our apprentices are in their 3rd year, and their 4th year will be when they graduate, just so you get an idea of how long it takes. But we have been preparing folks to help us with this.
The only thing I would add to that is we're not going to do anything through our ministry that I don't trust 100% in terms of people taking care of veterans.
Right.
So we're just going to focus them. And if that means we don't work anywhere but in these areas where we currently work, that's what we're going to be. When I say that we have to have qualified therapists in the room and healthy clergy with no agenda, those have to be people I know. I'm a little bit controlling when it comes to these guys. And so we will grow this program, and we certainly want to, but we want to help veterans 1% at a time with the best quality that we can offer. And we've got more to do right now than we could probably handle.
Yeah, and we actually, the Austin and San Antonio area is the next area that we're talking about going to expand to, because we have a lot of friends and churches there that are willing to work with us. Suzanne, my brother was a veteran, was a Vietnam veteran. He came back from the war badly damaged psychologically and spiritually. He died of alcoholism and organ failure 13 years after returning. Our family is still walking a healing path with our grief. What does your program do for extended family and children of veterans whose lives have also been destroyed? So I think that.
Well, I've forgotten to mention all night, and I'm sorry that we also have an addiction specialist who works with us. This statement sounds so bold. I would appreciate it if you wouldn't dismiss it. The Enneagram helps everybody. I just never offered it anyway that people haven't found it helpful, ever. But I think in terms of that kind of loss, it will explain things to you that you won't come to without it. And with that comes 3 things that are just essential. The first is self-knowledge. The second is compassion for other people. And the third is forgiveness just kind of follows. We use Enneagram a lot in situations where people have been abused, sexually abused, physically abused. There is just a whole range of compassion and understanding that comes with this great wisdom tradition. And so we are even planning to work with veterans with families of veterans, even if the veteran doesn't become part of our program.
Absolutely. Okay, Dr. Bison, are there any groups working with art therapy for veterans?
I believe there are. I don't have a lot of personal knowledge about that. I saw something recently that New York University is doing some things. Other than that, I really don't know how to answer that question, but that would be a great avenue to assist veterans.
Yeah, I think we can explore that once we are with it. This question I'm going to pose to the 2 of you, Suzanne and Dr. Bison, because I think it's probably both of you can contribute, which is how are Iraq and Afghan vets similar and or different from Gulf War, Vietnam, Korean, and World War II veterans? And it says I can add comments after yours if you would like. I don't know the question, but so I know you've done a lot of reading, we've had a lot of conversation about it. I think probably in clinical experience you've probably seen some differences. So do you want to talk a little bit about that, Joseph? That's kind of an open question, but I don't say anything about it.
Yeah. Well, obviously, the Vietnam veterans have had the civil rights issues as well involved in their service. As a new vet, we had more backing by the American people. So we have been getting more support and more help as opposed to the
I'll just tell you two or three little vignettes. We're working with a man who runs a center in Tyler. His name is Wayland Stewart, and he told us about a group of Vietnam veterans who are living out in the woods in East Texas, and they've been living there since they got back. And they live in tents and lean-tos. They seldom come to town, and they're pretty much self-sufficient. And he says when you go out there, it's like going back to 1969, usually 68, 69, 70s. They're still saying things like far out and groovy. And what they found is that they need one another so badly, they can't break out of that to come back into the culture. Second thing, a lot of these guys will go back now. And this is one. And I think the reasons are better several, and I'll tell mine, and you might want to stick to that. One of the things I found in working and talking with younger veterans is that a lot of the younger vets are men and women who didn't fit anywhere. They just didn't belong. And they needed and wanted a belonging system. And the military promises to offer you that belonging system. So a side thing there is our youngest son's gay. And his senior year in high school, there were recruiters in his school. He got pushed down the stairs for the 10th time for being gay. And an Army recruiter helped him up and said, you know, I can teach you to fight those guys. So, to make a long story short, our totally non-violent, very tender gay son joined the Army. And he lasted about 6 weeks. They called him in and asked him if he was gay, and he said, yes, I am, you need to send me home. And they did. But what he was looking for, and he's now 24, and if he was here, he would tell you, is that he was just looking for a place where he could do two things, man up and belong somewhere. Well, when your experience has been one of not belonging, and then your first experience of belonging has to do with people who are willing to die for you and for whom you're willing to die, then that puts belonging in a whole light that you will never experience again. So they go from nothing to this extraordinary belonging system, and then they come back to nothing. And all they long for is to be back in that belonging system. So my perception is that we can't entirely blame the military for the number of deployments that soldiers are experiencing, because many soldiers are saying, send me back, I'll gladly go. The last thing I'll say about that, though, is I've not run into a single veteran who talks about fighting for our freedom from Iraq or Afghanistan. They're not all caught up in what our rhetoric here is for why they're there. They're there fighting for each other, period. And they go back to take care of each other. And there isn't some protection of our shoulders and all of that business that's going on in my experience.
Sure. Well, I didn't feel like I needed to belong. The military did help me do that, and you get camaraderie with men so quickly, especially when you get shot at every day. You know, there's a lot there and an amazing excitement. I mean, there's no drug in the world that can give you the high of that adrenaline that you're facing every day on that edge. That's probably why I would go back, just because of that feeling, that elation that I was getting. It was amazing. That's what I was doing. I guess I was kind of a junkie in that thing. But yeah.
Lots of things are.
Yeah, I think so.
You know, I think we watched a little too much television because did y'all really like perk up when you said when you're getting shot at every day? Or did that just kind of go by? You know, we're getting to a place where we talk like that just kind of goes by. Can you imagine getting shot at every day? I think we've got to really slow down and take in the words.
Yeah, we've got like like 3 minutes left, and so I've got one more question.
Okay. I would just like to make a statement because of her story about her son. One of the things that's really important is that frontal lobes are not developed in men until about the age of 25. So young men who are going into services and into the war, they really don't have all of those. I mean, it's kind of like a TBI kind of issue there too. And that's something that I think we all should know.
And I think you're a good setup person, because the one comment I was going to offer to add to that is the average age of veterans now versus back in World War II is they're significantly younger. So we've got young men entering into service who mentally have not had necessarily, it's not across the board, but the brain development that veterans from like World War II would have had when they entered the war experience.
But I just want to add something to it. Women usually have their frontal lobes developed by 18.
Yes, we
don't.
Brief comment. I said we have time for just a very brief comment. Did you have something you wanted to say?
Well, I'll share some perspective, and I'm having a great deal of difficulty hearing with this microphone in the end. Part of it is I'm a Korean veteran. But I'm a minister and a psychologist that's worked with veterans from World War II, Korean, Vietnam, not so much adult veterans, but I'm going to share something with you. I was in Vietnam 8 years ago. And do not be surprised if the Iraqis and the Afghans have a different label than we're used to. You know what the Vietnamese called that war? The American War. The Iraqis and the Afghans made it. Now, just a little perspective. I had a great deal of difficulty hearing. Part of it's from loud aircraft engines, jets, and reciprocating. But we have a group of about 160 World War II veterans. If you know of some, we meet more. There are some Korean and Vietnam. Then I was an officer in Veterans for Peace here, and we had a national convention. It was mostly Vietnam veterans. And let me tell you, friends, there's something unique about them. And the Iraqi and Afghan veterans did not really participate with that group. Don't be surprised if they have a unique type of concern. The other thing is this. Are you aware that the court system is developing a special court for veterans?
Yeah, I talked about that earlier. I did.
Good. Because a number get into legal type of problems and they need special attention.
Okay.
So I appreciate what you're doing, but there's so much echo here, I can't pick up the voices.
Okay, thank you. I'll just close with this, because I know we're pushed up against our time. Several of you asked about volunteer opportunities and ways to get brochures out to like the Texas Workforce Commission. And we can use volunteers like the Trinity Ministry in a lot of ways. So if you're interested in volunteering, the brochure we gave you has our contact information on it. Please reach out to us. Helping getting the word out is absolutely critical for us, because reaching veterans, it's a word of mouth process. So if you know veterans, if you're involved with veterans organizations, I'll show up anywhere you ask me to be and talk about what we do. We're so passionate about this, and we know the only way we're going to reach the people we need is if we get to them through people they trust. So that's the number one way you can be helpful to us. Whoever said this about getting brochures, I have thousands of them, so I'd be happy to give you a carload. I just need to know how to get in touch with you. And then several of you asked about how we're going to go about funding this. We have applied for some foundation grants. We're in the process of doing that. But at this point, we we are relying on gracious and generous individuals like Mary Ellen and Henry and Pate Rehabilitation and some other folks who've come alongside us. So if it's something you're passionate about, we have the Bill and Fran McElvaney Fund established, designated for the purposes of helping veterans and their families. Thank you all very much.